Why do we learn? What do we learn? And how do we apply what we learn in the real world? These were some of the questions I was curious about when I started this podcast. This is an audio and video show where I interview a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. On each episode of this show, we interview a guest who has a story to share about how they acquired a set of skills and knowledge in a creative and innovative manner. In the process, we hope to uncover a new understanding of learning as conceptualized, imagined, and narrated by the guest in our show. Today's guest is someone who I'm really excited about this conversation. She just published her first book. So, a little bit about Anisha before we start the conversation. So, Anisha has lived in Mumbai, Delhi, Bengaluru, and London. She has a Masters of Arts degree in English Literature from Mumbai University. She has worked in publishing and on various literary projects, including literary television programs like Kitab Nama Books and Beyond and the popular Jaipur Literature Festival. She's currently in communication at a leading think tank that engages with the nexus of environment, economic opportunity, and human well being. You can find her on Instagram, and today she's here to talk about her first novel, Girls Who Stray. So, Anisha, thank you again for making time for this. And to just get started, yeah, like to get started, Anisha, I'm just curious about your childhood. Where did you grow up, and what were some of the things you were interested in, apart from school growing up? You can also tell me about school. When did this reading habit develop for you, and was it always writing and reading from a very young age for you?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. So I grew up mostly in Mumbai. I lived as a kid in Goa for a couple of years. So my father was in the hotel business. He was working in as the general manager and then later on in marketing for the Leela group of hotels. So I lived for a very small period of time in Mangalore, then Goa, and then when I was about 5 or 6, I think we moved to Bombay. My mom is a history and English teacher, and so I wouldn't say my parents are very literary or anything like that, but my mom definitely has been a reader, but it's more kind of genre fiction, more more commercial stuff. But books was always a thing, like in my house. So we would always go to the library routinely. I would go with my mom at least once in a week, once in 2 weeks, and exchange books and while growing up, it was like R.L. Stein and Nancy Drew and of course Harry Potter and all of that. But I do remember in school, I think I was that kid who was always in the library, like I was that kid who was like that nerdy kid who didn't want to like socialize much and would spend the short breaks and the long breaks also after lunch or whatever, just in the library looking at different books, and the other kids would come and ask me for book recommendations. And I mean literature always had, like, in part of our subjects we had English language and English literature because I studied in an ICSE school. So I think just I mean literature always fascinated me, right? Just this subject where you could get I mean, to me, it always seemed like you're sort of transporting yourself literally into another world and also deeply into the mind of somebody else that no other subject could offer that kind of opportunity and potential, right? Um, and I was always very good in English and social studies, and then terrible, like really bad at maths and science, and it really terrified me. So I think from a young age only I knew that like this is the line for me, and yeah.
Was there a particular book that you remember picking up and you feel like that was the book that really got you hooked onto reading? I know you mentioned some authors, but any particular story that you remember that really sticks out from your childhood?
I mean, I think like so many of us, I think I was a huge Harry Potter fan. I didn't actually read it chronologically, so I think I read the first book, and then I read like the third book, then I came back to the second book, and I jumped all over the place. But I think like so many of us, we really grew up with Harry Potter, like we really grew up with him and Hermione and Ron and the whole cast of characters. And I remember crying, I think, when Sirius Black died, and like I got really emotionally involved. Um, So that was definitely like a whole. It was like a whole world, and it was a whole experience. It wasn't just one book, right? It was seven books. Apart from Harry Potter, I really enjoyed R.L. Stein. I think again, like so many other people. Um, it was only much later when I studied literature and I did my BA and my MA that I read a lot more serious stuff. But as a child, what comes to mind is basically R.L. Stein and Harry Potter.
Interesting. And like, I'm curious about your time in university because you did do a BA in English literature and you also did an MA in English literature. And you
Yeah.
studied at two really good universities like St. Xavier's and, Mumbai University. So for that 5 year period, what was your experience studying literature? How is a literature course structured? Because I'm curious because I did it a couple of years later, but for someone listening and for someone that wants to be a writer, how do you think, studying literature at university can benefit them in maybe shaping their perspective as a writer?
Yeah, so I did I did I mean the way it's structured at Bombay University is you have 3 years and in undergrad, and so I did political science, history, and then I majored in literature. So our literature course was at the BA level was very interesting. So we had papers on critical theory, we had papers on film, where we studied, French New Wave cinema and, German films, and we had a paper on popular culture. So it was English literature and popular cultural studies, and so it was much wider than just, just fiction and just literature. So yes, we did look at Virginia Woolf and we did look at, Indian literature and stuff, but it was much wider than that as well. um, I I really think that, of course, studying literature sort of forces you to study to read the greats, at least, to read the best and to read the greatest books, at least from the past 100 years or so. And I do think that syllabi, I mean, professors are because the world is changing so fast and things are moving so fast. Uh, you know, the syllabus is not really, at least when I studied, it was trying to move with the times. It was trying to keep pace with the change, like the changing nature of things. Therefore, popular culture, and so we would discuss like Britney Spears and like all kinds of things. So it wasn't just high literary sort of novels. And I think that's a great thing. And at the MA also, it was very wide ranging. So we had a paper on rereading canonical texts. So looking at Shakespeare, looking at these classical works through different lenses. So looking at it through a Marxist perspective, through a feminist perspective, through a psychoanalytical perspective. So looking at like a Jungian perspective of things. Um, Looking at, say, for example, Antony and Cleopatra, the play by Shakespeare, and looking at it from a psychoanalytical perspective. So just re-looking at the classics, that was a very interesting paper. Then we did a paper. I can't remember the name of the paper, but we did study like BIPOC population. There was a novel which was about a native Canadian woman who is she's a heroin addict, and she's going through all kinds of problems. And then there was another beautiful novel called Ceremony. I still remember the title, about again a Native American man who's I think just returned from the Korean War, and I mean he's dealing with a bunch of issues. So it was a really wide ranging kind of syllabus. It was not, and of course, apart from all of this, we also studied Rohinton Mistry and Amitabh Ghosh and a bunch of the Indian classical popular books as well. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it kind of forces you to read the grades and then, of course, to kind of critically examine them and critically look at them. Um, yeah, I mean, the danger is to not, because you're not, if you want to write fiction, then the danger is to not bring in too much of an academic perspective, because that can really weigh down fiction, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, I think studying those couple of years studying literature was some of the best in my life.
That's amazing, Anisha. Like I'm just curious, like something I've always, wondered about is now that you are a writer, like has it changed your perspective on reading? What are some ways you can read a text more critically, as a writer, or like any tips on some lenses I can apply to reading a fiction book and to maybe get more from it? Because my first interpretation of a story is just to enjoy the story, but I know you can also enjoy it in terms of the language, the figures of speech used, the settings, the characters. So if you could throw some light on how to read like a text more critically or more analytically, that would be quite interesting to know.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't think that I myself have applied all of that to reading, right? Like, I think you kind of, at university, it's very interesting and exciting and stuff, but then, you go through life and you have work and, anyway, there's honestly like very limited time to read, with social media and everything. So, I'd say don't just enjoy it, just get into it, whatever it takes to get into it. If you're reading it from if you want to read it from a specific like a feminist lens or whatever, then obviously like pick the right book first of all. And I mean look at feminist theories, and there is a lot of this stuff, and then reread that book, try to reread that book with an understanding of what you gain from that theory. But if you're just reading for pleasure, I think just get into the flow of it and let it take you where it takes you.
Is that how you normally enjoy reading, just reading for pleasure in most
Yeah,
cases?
definitely. I definitely, yeah. Now I don't apply that kind of academic lens anymore.
That's fascinating. Like, in terms of like reading, Anisha, like, was there a particular author? Because I remember some of my other friends who've written and who are really like passionate readers. There are some authors who they've read like chronologically, or they've read a lot of books by a particular author. So, apart from the children's authors you read growing up, like, is there another author whose books that you have read like over a period of time and that you particularly enjoy as a reader?
Yeah, I think for me it was Toni Morrison, who's this this luminary like American writer, and she died a couple of years ago. So I think for like her name really stands out for me. I mean, I've read a lot of different authors, but with her, I think I just loved her so much. I wanted to read like all her books. So over a period of I don't know 6 7 months or maybe a year, I just read all her books back to back. Um, she has extremely deep and very sharp sense of wisdom, I think, in her writing. And yeah, I think a lot of just humanity in her characters that I'm struggling with and learning how to do, because writing characters is really hard because you tend to begin in a very stereotypical fashion, and it's a very one-dimensional kind of portrayal, and to really delve deep into and make the character come alive is something that I am struggling with, and I think she does it beautifully. I mean, and it's she does it in sort of in a very organic kind of way, like it doesn't feel forced at all. And of course, like the whole African American experience, sorry, the African American experience and struggle, and but again, so she writes very, very politically, like it's really political stuff, but it's from a very deeply intimate lens. Um, um, and a lot of her characters are women, and she has a very female centric kind of powerful voice that I was really attracted to. So yeah, I'd say Toni Morrison is somebody that really stands out.
Amazing. And like once you're done with your master's, you always have the option of taking up academia, but you explored other career opportunities. In communications, you worked with literature festivals, you worked with other authors. So how have those experiences helped you as a writer? Like, what did you learn from those professional experiences after your master's degree?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think I was like deep into academia, and I was confused about, whether I want to teach or whether I was not sure about what I wanted to do. But I did have a friend who was working in publishing in Delhi, and Delhi has all the big publishing houses. And I did go to the Jaipur Lit Fest with my friends from the MA, and just it seemed very exciting and glamorous to me. And it's something that I definitely wanted to try. I think yeah, I mean, when you're in publishing, it gives you a perspective on, the literary culture in the contemporary world, and really how it's made, and what drives it, and what are the forces that kind of manage it. And it's definitely absolutely not as ideal as you want it to be, because there's so many financial constraints, and a publishing house has so much to answer for, and it's a business at the end of the day. So of course you have a lot of books on celebrities, and all of it, I think for me, like, I sort of woke up to the fact that it's far more commercial than I thought it to be, because when you're from the outside and when you're young and naive, you think it's all very literary and very cool. But then you actually understand a publishing house, you realize that it's really the self-help books and the business books and the celebrity books that's mostly driving things, right? So yeah, but despite that, I mean, I still think that publishing is, it's healthy in our country. There is a decent amount of fiction also that's published. There's some really good fiction as well, and it's very varied. So we have, so I when I went to Delhi, I didn't work in a big publishing house. I worked in a small publishing house called Yoda Press. And so there are these small independent publishers as well that have more of like an ideological focus. And yeah, so I worked with this lady called Arpita, and I worked in a bookstore that she ran as well, in Hauz Khas village in Delhi.
That must have been like really enlightening. I think because you got to see what it's like to, from the other end as well, as a bookstore owner, as a publishing house, and that must have given you some insights as a reader and as a writer. And were you conceptualizing this book at that time? Was that something you always thought you would do? Like when did the idea of Girls Who Stray come to your mind from recollection?
Yeah, so while I was working there, I was always fascinated with writing and writers, and I wrote like small little pieces, but I didn't show anybody. But I mean, I never thought that I'd write, a novel, or I'd write a book of short stories or anything like that. I think I lived in Delhi for a couple of years, and I mean, I was in a relationship with someone, and it ended very badly. And I think who was a writer as well. And after that, I think, I don't know what it was about it, but I was very compelled to start writing. It's not like I wanted to write about the relationship or anything, but there were certain themes that were kind of driving me to write. I think, that were kind of compelling me. So one is, well, post the breakup, I did want to write about like heartbreak and loss, but in the context of the Nirbhaya rape case that had happened, right? So I was in Delhi while that was happening. And there were protests and stuff, and I went to observe them. I wasn't really part of it, but I was kind of on the sidelines of things. And so I really wanted to write about, a woman going through heartbreak and loss in the context of these larger questionings of, gender violence, and just misogyny and patriarchy. And so, I mean, I have an extensive scene in the book where the girl is kind of walking around Delhi with all these protests taking place, and she's musing on her own heartbreak, and her own pain. And then she's wondering whether, how does her pain kind of, there are there's this much larger pain like that this girl has faced, right? So what is her pain in the context of this larger pain? So these were kind of like just feelings and questions I wanted to explore. And another thing I felt like compelled to write about was also like modernity. I feel like, um, I felt like I really wanted to write about feeling very kind of out of pace with the with the pace of change and with the pace of the economy and with technology and stuff. And I feel like there's a sense of kind of anxiety, and there's a general feeling like you can't keep pace with things, that kind of feeling. Because honestly, like with technology, things have changed so fast. Like I think we're all still just struggling constantly with some very basic things, like you and I were just struggling with. Um, so, so I have again an extensive scene where this girl is sitting in the mall and she's kind of just observing things and just, procrastinating, and she feels very out of sync with her peers because, they all have cool jobs and they are all posting on LinkedIn and she's not on it and all of that. I so these were the two key kind of driving uh, themes, if you like. And then much later, I really wanted to weave it all together through a thriller. Yeah,
Got it. So, if it's okay, Anisha, I'd love to read the book promo, just to give the listeners a background
sure, sure.
of the book. So, which I really enjoyed reading. I mean, it's so like inviting, and you feel like what's happening in this world because everything seems okay at the start, and then it just starts crumbling in the middle. So, 23 and unnamed returns from an obscure British university armed with a useless degree to her new home in Noida, a home of feeble men and the breakdown of her parents' marriage. Serial procrastinator, overthinker, anxious, and unhinged, A overcompensates her low self-esteem and sense of alienation with snootiness. Before long, A finds herself elbow deep in an affair with a property developer and subsequently in a double murder. Faced with anxieties of the crime along with the precarities of living in a hyper-modern city marked by seething inequality, A navigates heartbreak and tiny acts of freedom. So, there's so much to unpack in that promo as well. Like one thing I wanted to ask you is because you've lived in so many cities, Anisha, like Mumbai, Delhi, these are like massive cities with such interesting sort of landscapes. But why did you choose Noida? What was your thinking behind Noida as a setting? And how did you build that world of Noida in the book to start off with?
Yeah, I think Delhi, I didn't Delhi and Noida, I didn't like consciously say that, okay, I want to write a novel set in Delhi and Noida. But there were two books that really had a huge impact on me. One was Deepti Kapoor, who later became a friend of mine. Her book called A Bad Character, which is about a young woman who has an affair in Delhi. It's her first real relationship, and she discovers Delhi through that relationship. And then the second book was a book called Capital by Rana Dasgupta, which is a very deep dive into sort of the psychology of people in Delhi. Mostly wealthy people, but it's also about money, economy, the economy of the city, etc. And somehow both these books are just kind of playing around in my mind, and um, I wanted to really be like I wanted the setting to be this far off kind of suburbia, because the character is very alienated, right? So in Delhi, and I have family who live in Greater Noida. So in Delhi, you have these apartment complexes which are these privatized housing bubbles, which are very kind of far away from the main city, and they are kind of self-enclosed. They have like swimming pool, clubhouse, everything inside. um, and I wanted to really, base a character there. It's a very new world. It's a very new apartment complex. It's just being built, and so how does the character feel when they're in the setting, right? Um, Whereas I think in Bombay, even though I live in the suburbs, I live in Thane. It's kind of the suburbs and the sort of main city. I think it all just piles on each other. In Delhi, it's kind of more segregated, right? So I wanted that kind of feeling. And later on, because I wanted to explore all these questions of like gender violence and women and all of that, I think Delhi just became the natural setting for things. So yeah.
Got it. And a little bit about the character that you've created, and I don't know if it's going to be extended when the book comes out. We know who A is, or is the character's name A? But right at the start, you mentioned that A23 and unnamed returns from an obscure British university armed with a useless degree to her new home in Noida. Spent some time, at SOAS in the UK, where you did a degree yourself. So, did your experience in that university in any way inspire, the character you created? And what was your experience as an international student like as well? And London's such an amazing city, so if you could throw some light on that character and where the inspiration for A comes from, because I mean, right now, all I know about her is that she stays in Noida and she's 23, which is like a very uncertain time in anyone's life. You're figuring out things maybe after university. So, you know, I just want to know your thoughts on this character without revealing anything about what's going to happen in the book. But where's the character coming from?
Yeah. Uh, can you can you hear me? Can you hear me properly?
I can hear you. Yes, Anisha.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I had a great time at the university and I had a great course and everything. And yeah, of course, London is an amazing city. I had a great time there. I think I was not really writing about my experiences, but so much, but it was more like I feel like a lot of privileged Indians, which is a lot of us, go abroad to study because it's just something you do, right? And you can afford it or you get funding or whatever. And a lot of the times I just feel like these degrees are very, very interesting, but you can't really apply them. They don't really translate so much to the sort of the job market back home and also in the West. A lot of them are because they're. It's just something that we do because our peers are all studying abroad, and of course we want that experience of living abroad, living on our own, having that sense of independence and all of that. Um, so that is something that I a lot of my friends also did degrees abroad, and then a lot of people came back, and I did write about this character also wanting to continue to stay in the UK, but then because of visa issues she has to come back. Um, so yeah, this is just something that I observed with a lot of people, and I wanted to write about, and yeah, a lot of people are telling me that they can relate to it because they all did useless degrees. um but yeah, I personally had a great time. I had a great course, and I love living in London. So yeah.
Yeah, like because this is your first novel, and this is something because I really enjoy reading fiction, and a lot of people often think about how the story that the writers write and their personal lives, how that intermingles, and you spoke about another relationship. So like this story is completely independent to your like personal life, or is some parts of it inspired from certain things that have happened to you? So how do you move between, like, would you consider this complete fiction or part fiction, non-fiction? So where does it stand in that sort of spectrum?
Yeah. No, so I think a lot of fiction, especially first novels, is kind of it's kind of in the middle, right? It's in the middle ground between sort of being, it happened to you, being autobiographical, but not entirely. So it's sort of they're sort of half truths, I feel. It's in that gray middle space kind of a thing. So it like a lot of the stuff that I've written in the book did not happen to me. uh, a lot of it I imagined, but some stuff did happen as well, and it was more than the actual incidents. It was the feelings around it, right? It was how it made me feel, what were the insights gained, what how the what were the confusions as well. It's not necessarily only about insight and learning and but also what are the confusions, what were the what were the problems it gave rise to, just yeah. So it's hard to tell really. It's hard to tell really where sort of it's autobiographical or whether it's imagination. I think it's always in the realm in between both these things.
Got it. And like in terms of the language and how you've written this book, like for someone that wants to write a novel in India, I don't think it's as easy, because I'm sure there is an entire process from writing down the actual manuscript to submitting it to a publishing house or an agent. And so what is that entire process like, and how long did it take you to go from this notion of actually ideating it to actually get it to a publisher?
Yeah, so I mean, the writing itself was honestly, it took like 7, 8 years, honestly, but I gave it up in the middle for a couple of years, especially when I was in London. I was busy with my course and, I just got dejected. I just was like, okay, this is not for me. I don't think I can do this. But then I came back to it eventually, and I feel like it's been the running thread through my life. There's been a lot of change, a lot of upheaval, but this book has kind of been the one continuous thread. So in India, currently, most big publishers, I think, only accept kind of solicited manuscripts, which means, you have to go through a literary agent. So definitely publishers do prefer manuscripts that come in through agents. So I had submitted, and because I'm kind of connected to this world, it definitely helps. It at least it helps. It helps the agent kind of because they get a huge volume of manuscripts, right? So if you go through a connection or whatever, then it at least it encourages them to open your email first, right? So I sent it to one or two agents. One didn't get back, and then I got the Jacaranda Literary Agent, which is an agency of, I think there are 4, 5 women and one guy working there. So they wanted to acquire my book basically, and then after that, so that happened in October last year. I think I submitted it to them in September. They got back pretty quickly, actually, in a couple of weeks. And then they started pitching it. I think only around March or April, and they sent my manuscript to just one editor basically at Bloomsbury, and he liked it and he wanted to acquire it immediately, and then they suggested that I go with him rather than saying no to him, and then there's a chance that I could get rejections from other houses later, and they advised me to go with him because he's a very good editor and he supports his authors. So yeah, actually for me it was relatively quickly. Like I do know that publishing takes very long. Sometimes it can take years where you just send it to some editor and they don't get back to you in 10 months, 1 year, and you just keep following up and they just don't respond because they also get a huge volume of manuscripts and there's so much on their plate. Um, so yeah, it's a long, very long drawn out process and there's a lot of like dejection and all of that. But you should just power on and, be hopeful.
Yeah, like 7 to 8 years, I'm sure it's a long time. And like that story, like, does it change in your mind over time? Like, was this story something else when you thought about it? And, over that period, through the influences you've picked up in the middle, does that story change in your mind, or was it always, the story that it is today in a way?
No, no, it definitely changed. I didn't know what the story was, right? Like I had no idea. I just wanted to write about feminism and I wanted to write about modernity and I somewhere because I also had a career in the development sector, the social sector. I wanted to write about inequality as well. Um, so I did not really have a story in mind at all. But it was only much later because, again, like so many other people, I love crime. I love watching true crime. And just I feel like the challenge of writing crime is very exciting because it's hard to write good crime and to keep that kind of suspense alive. So it's only much later that I was like, okay, I've written all these pieces and I do think they're decent, but then how do I weave them all together? And it was only much later that I realized that I can do it through the narrative of a thriller. And I have based this, the crime that takes place in the book, I based it on a real life case in Delhi. And yeah, it's also about kind of being implicated in a crime and not sure what to do in that situation. So it's not at all a clear cut chronological linear kind of process at all. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned, Anisha, that you work with an editor, so like the editor takes your manuscript. How long would that back and forth process go? So is there just one editor, or do you? I mean, the cover of the book looks amazing as well, right? It's just this character in the middle. It seems like the characters in the middle of something is happening. Like for me, reading into it, I love book covers. It firstly just stands out because it's so colorful, but
Yeah.
my immediate question was that what's happening in that particular moment when this particular photo was taken. So you know what was your thinking behind the cover design, and like how did you come up with that idea?
Yeah, so I mean, I worked with a great publisher, and so in terms of the editing, first, so they do basically there are different levels of editing. So there's like a structural or development edit, which is a very large an overview kind of edit, right? Where they say, okay, this character is not working, or this scene chronologically just doesn't make sense, this entire section. So that is a large level. So my agent they also do a level of edit, the agent, right, when they want to represent you. So I had written another like 30,000 to 40,000 words about this character and her mother character who's based in Bombay, and I went very deep into all of that, but and her youth and her life as a young person and stuff. But my agent said that all of that, although it's well written, it's not at all connected to the plot, and it completely drags the book, and it would be another, I don't know, 200 pages or something. So I cut out all of that. So at that level itself, there was that structural edit done. So my editor Bloomsbury said that there was no real need for a structural or development edit. But then we went into the copy edit, which is like line by line, move this comma here, move this word there, so that kind of thing. So all of that happened very smoothly. And then there's proofreading, which is at the third level where they do that at the end. So all of that was pretty smooth. In terms of the book cover, there was a wonderful designer called Malvika Tiwari, and so they gave me different options. Um, this was the option I liked best. So initially they sent it to me with just the girl looking without the fragmented kind of feeling of the face, right? The face broken up. And then they sent it to me again with that breakup, and then we went a little bit back and forth in terms of the colors, and we wanted some really pop colors because there's a lot about malls and modernity and stuff. So we wanted that kind of very modern Black Mirror-ish kind of feeling. Um, and yeah, I mean, I really like the cover. I think it's very intriguing, and I've gotten great feedback and got a amazing designer. So I'm very happy.
you know the book's coming out on November 18th. I'm sure you must be like busy with promoting it this last week, going into that week. So what is like the economics of like publishing a book in India? What does that look like, Anisha, for someone that is self in like is working with a publisher, but how much of the investment has to come in from you as well? And not just an investment in terms of money, but also an investment in terms of time. And, I know you attended a lot of, book readings or book groups. So how does, like two questions here. What is the economics, and what's the promotion and sales sort of cycle like for a book release, especially your first book?
Yeah. Yeah, so the economics is, to be very blunt, it's definitely not something that you can make a living off. So you definitely need a full-time job, right? Like or a part-time, whatever it is. You need a source of income. Like I mean, you cannot depend on this as a source of income. So you get an advance, and then you start getting royalties against the advance. But it's like I said, it's not at all enough to manage and to survive. Um, but yeah, I mean, so if I mean, if you already know that, then you don't have any problems. Uh, in terms of the promotions and stuff, so I'm also learning since this is my first time. So the my publisher is great. They have a great marketing team. So they have plans on sending the book to bloggers and retailers and having all these additional kind of promotional tools and print bookmarks and posters, and also they're doing social media and stuff. But definitely only and only kind of you can really care about your book most in the world, right? Especially if it's your first book. So I really think you need to go out, and you need to push in whatever way you can. um, So I personally have been last couple of weeks I've been going to these book clubs and silent reading groups. So there are these silent reading like the one that they have in Juhu. So like there are those all over the city, right? So I've just been going, been part of it, and then asking the organizers if I can talk about my book a little bit for 2 minutes. So they've all been very kind and they've allowed me to do that. And there's actually quite a thriving, rich reading culture in Bombay as well that I didn't know of, to be honest. And yeah, lots of young people, which I'm amazed by. Like, you think young people are just sitting on social media all day, but a lot of young people in these book clubs, and it's just an amazing, thriving culture. And yeah, so I think you really need to push. And then whatever other networks you have, I mean, if you know somebody famous, then that is really important because a lot of it is driven by, influencers and everything. So just be nice to people and don't get in anyone's bad books, and just try to use the networks you have, try to use the community that you already have.
You've got some amazing reviews already, from some really prominent writers like Namita Gokhale. And so, like, is that something the publishers help you with? Is that something you have to work around and, bring in for the book? Like, how does that work in terms of reviews before the book actually comes out?
Yeah, so for the blurbs, it definitely, I mean, obviously it helps if you know them personally, right? So I worked with both Namita Gokhale and with the actress Kalki Kekla. I in fact took a break from my career a couple of years ago to work on this book while I was working as Kalki's PA. So so she was very kind to give me a blurb, and back then as well she had read some of the excerpts and stuff. So in terms of, so that's Kalki and Namita. For Shoikat, he's quite a well-known novelist, and he's the head of the creative writing department at Ashoka University. So I really wanted a man as well because because it's such a female-centric book, I kind of wanted a man's perspective. And yeah, I mean, I wrote to a couple of others, but they were quite caught up. And Shoikat was, he was very kind and very supportive, and he gave me a great blurb. And yeah, I mean, so definitely if you know somebody, it helps. But then also obviously reach out to somebody who you think would like the book and would give you a blurb, and then the publisher does help if they have a connect. So yeah.
For the final few questions, like almost an hour has gone by quite quickly, Anisha. But,
Yeah.
I'm curious because you're someone that studied literature in India, in a city like Mumbai, and like, you've seen like literature like evolve in an Indian landscape, over the past, whatever, 10 to 15 years. So what are your thoughts on the Indian literary scene, in general, and like how it's evolved, at least in the time that you've grown up and become a writer yourself? Like what kinds of stories you think are more like people want to listen to, and this dichotomy between like like hard literary fiction and more commercial books. So any thoughts on the Indian literary scene?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the Indian literary scene is in a good space now. There's lots happening. Think that uh, but I do think that it's veering more towards veering more towards the commercial and the genre side of things. But that will always happen, right? Like, but I think that with book events, bookstagrammers, literature festivals are huge. I mean, I've been kind of supporting the Jaipur Lit Fest, and I'll be there next year as well. And just the amount of crowds and the amount of young people, and so I think really events and social media has really changed the landscape of literature like a huge amount. Authors have become celebrities. I don't think that was the case all that much earlier. Um, and now they have fan followings and all of that. So I think it's generally a healthy space. Um, it's obviously, I mean, if you want to write, it's also very competitive. It's hard to get a good publisher. It's hard to get a big publisher and stuff. But but yeah, I mean, I do see a lot of publishers also taking in terms of fiction. I do see that there's a lot of a lot of debuts are given opportunities. So I think overall it's a healthy space.
It's great. For the last question, Anisha, like you mentioned true crime, and something that you are like something that you enjoy, like consuming in general. But like, if you had to give me three true crime or thriller recommendations, it could be a film, a book, a TV series. Because I'm a big true crime fan, I just love, any like solid recommendation, and maybe like a book, film, and show, if that makes sense, or any other way as well.
Yeah. So book, I mean, I would say Gone Girl. That comes to my mind directly because I read the book and I saw the film, and I really liked the book, and I really liked Gillian Flynn. There was a show called The Sinner, which is it had a couple of different seasons. I think I saw season 2 and season 3. It's about just this cop who's kind of internally, struggling and damaged and just these strange cases. I think there was the second season was the one that really intrigued me. I think it was a deeply kind of psychological thriller, and you're always kind of kept on your toes, and it was very scary, but not in like a gory, kind of sense, but it very like a very slow burn, very psychological kind of thing. And then there's True Detective also that I absolutely loved. I've seen only season 1 actually. I didn't want to watch any of the other seasons because I don't think anything would match up to the first season. I mean that character is kind of he's become a cult, right? Like the character that Matthew McConaughey plays. And what else? There was Making of a Murderer. I think a lot of people saw that, and it's a very old one. Uh, I haven't seen anything lately. The one from Delhi, the Burhari case one was I thought really well made. So yeah, I mean, just Netflix has some really great stuff. Yeah, so those are my recommendations.
The Burari one was really scary. I saw it and I had like nightmares for a couple of. True Detective sounds really interesting. I will look it up. So Anisha, for like, I just want to ask you, like, anything you want to share with the listeners, about where they can purchase the book, about different places they can access the book, about any promotional events where you will be present live. So any last thoughts you'd like to share with your future readers about this book that's coming out?
Sure. So, like you mentioned, the book is launched on the 18th of November. So currently, it's available on pre-order on Amazon. So you can order it now, and it'll come to you after the 18th. And it'll also be available on in bookstores across the country after the 18th. So I am planning some events in Bombay, Delhi, and probably Bangalore for the next couple of months. Probably Bombay will be around mid-December at probably Crosswords in Juhu, but I'm just figuring that out. And Delhi will probably be in Jan, and Bangalore also will probably be in Jan. So just follow me on Instagram. It's anisha.lalvani.54, and I'll put all my updates there. And yeah, I'm very excited for the book to be out, and of course for people just to hear what people think of it. And yeah.
Thanks, Anisha. And on that positive note, do Girls Who Stray is out on 18th November. It's a book I'm really excited to read. Thank you, Anisha, for making time for this. And for the listeners tuning in, do stay tuned for more such stories of amazing young Indians changing the future of our country in their own unique ways. So this is the Tisha Tuber and Abhishek Shetty signing off on this episode of Learning Stories.